This is TWiT.
Let's talk about Face ID, which hits the pockets of a lot of folks these days as the iPhone 10 begins shipping today. The Daily Mail in the UK wrote about many of the privacy concerns raised by Face ID, and we're going to talk about some of those right now. But it also wrote that Apple's introduction is likely to bring about widespread use of facial recognition technology in a way that we haven't seen before, even though facial recognition technology is in other things. This is going to make it a really ubiquitous kind of thing. It's going to inure people to biometrics in a way that they have not been used to before. And it's different than the kinds of biometrics we've used before. When you look at someone and you know they've given their fingerprint for various identification purposes or maybe to unlock their phone, you can't look at them and determine that a fingerprint that you know about matches up with that person, but you can look at them and know that a face does. So it does change things in rather interesting ways. Scarlet, Privacy International does a lot of work on biometrics, so I'm wondering what your organization's take is on the new Face ID in the iPhone 10.
So I think to begin, what you're seeing is, in general, I think the public is inured to trading away sort of bits and pieces of our identity expressed as data. And one thing to note is that biometric data is particularly sensitive data. I think the other thing to note is that there are a lot of narratives about the accuracy of biometric data. And I think that we should maybe interrogate those narratives a bit, because there are studies that have shown, for example, that rates of accuracy can really vary depending on, the quality of the data that's collected. And also, for example, I think it was, so Georgetown released this report, I think it was last year, called the Perpetual Lineup, that was about law enforcement use of facial recognition technology around the country. And they noted that actually for certain races, for example, facial recognition, the current state of facial recognition software is not necessarily as accurate as for other races. So to the extent that you're using facial recognition technology, it can maybe disproportionately affect certain groups in terms of how accurate the data can be. I think from our perspective, our surveillance work focuses a lot on state surveillance. So we're primarily concerned with how states adopt and implement novel forms of technology. But I think, there is this kind of private sector aspect to that, because often it's companies that are developing this technology, and that market will grow. And there will also be companies that will sell this technology to governments. And then the other kind of corporate government nexus is that when companies start to collect this data, it can create a honeypot for third parties, including governments. I think the other concerns are when facial recognition data is used, for example, to make inferences about people and then to make what we would describe as consequential decisions. We would consider consequential decisions to be those that might affect a person's right. And that can include a broad range of rights. And this applies in both the private and the government context. So in the private context, you might imagine, for example, companies that use facial recognition or other biometric data to make decisions about a person's health or suitability for a job or suitability for a place at a public university, maybe. These are just random examples that are off the top of my head. But on the state side of things, you could also imagine facial recognition technology being used in ways that could also infringe a broad range of rights. So again, referencing that Georgetown report, I believe there was discussion there about how there was no explicit prohibition among most law enforcement agencies for using facial recognition technology to police protests. So to use that technology to identify people attending protests. And obviously that could have a chilling effect on both the right to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly.
Right. And that Georgetown study that you mentioned also included that nearly half of all Americans are in a law enforcement database that includes facial recognition.
And that was in 2016, by the way. That was in 2016, the year that the FBI thumbprint database had been expanded to the next-gen database to include biometrics and DNA and everything. So there's no indication that that number has decreased since 2016.
Right. And one thing that has changed since the last time we pondered the iPhone 10 and its Face ID here on This Week in Law is just yesterday we learned via Reuters, which got its hands on a developer agreement between Apple and a third-party developer, that despite what Apple has been very discursive about since it announced the iPhone 10, and despite its responses to Senator Al Franken's concerns, that he wrote an open letter to the company and said, hey, you're going to have all this 3D facial identification information on people. Please assure us that that is only going to reside, please tell us what you're going to do with that data and make sure that we feel good about that. And the response has been, well, it's only going to reside in a secure vault on the device itself. It's not even going to be on our servers. But it appears now, based on the terms of this contract that Reuters has seen, that Apple will allow developers to take certain facial data off the phone as long as they agree then to seek customer permission and not sell the data to third parties. So that seems problematic on any number of fronts. Just ticking down the list, the granting of customer permission, we talk a lot on the show about how things aren't read, people don't pay attention to the rights that they're giving away. Is this going to be buried in 20 pages of legalese? Is it going to be something meaningful as far as getting customer consent? That remains to be seen. And also this contractual stricture on Apple's developers, please get consent and don't ever sell it. That's a contractual stricture. So contracts are breached all the time. And there are some 2 million apps in the App Store. So it's going to be, I think, very difficult once this genie is out of the bottle and this facial data that was supposed to live only in the secure vault on your phone is in the hands of various and sundry third-party developers, for it not to wind up in law enforcement databases and not to wind up in marketing databases for people who want to market to you based on what your various facial expressions might be. It seems to be a big problem that just was made public yesterday. And as far as I know, Apple has not yet responded to what Reuters unearthed. So
and it's important that I think, even if Apple is not doing this, I mean, we haven't seen the contract. This is just what Reuters has reported. But even if Apple is not doing this, there's nothing to stop any of the other companies that are building facial recognition tech into their phones from having exactly this sort of language. So if we're not seeing it now with Apple, which, again, I think that Apple has been as privacy focused as we could have hoped and as proactive as we could have hoped on building this correctly from the ground up. I think that I personally am at least far less confident that, Huawei or any of the other numerous cheaper Android phones are going to be following the same best practices.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. What do you think, Scarlet, of the fact that even though Apple doesn't want to do bad things with your data, it is going to allow third parties, apparently, if this Reuters report is accurate, to have access to that data?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything you and Emory have said. I mentioned how this data can create sort of a honeypot for third parties, and I was thinking there more about perhaps unauthorized access. But what you're seeing here is a kind of proliferation creep, which you see in a lot of instances where there's this understanding that data might be confined to one place for one purpose, but it ends up ends up sort of in the hands of multiple parties. I guess I'm also curious. I don't know what the sort of protected status is of biometric data, like of your face under U.S. law. But I think there's this question about like if you're giving away that data to third-party developers, if that means then that like you could have the state just act. I don't know if it engages the third-party doctrine at all. I might be completely off base here, but with, Carpenter v. U.S. going up to the Supreme Court, I think there is this question about all the things that we willingly give away, and I say willingly sort of sarcastically, but what users consent to in terms of giving away to third-party companies, how that actually affects also the way that we protect that information vis-a-vis the state.
Right, and I'm a little miffed at Apple, I guess, that in the course of, again, if this Reuters report turns out to be accurate, that in the course of addressing people's concerns over Face ID and privacy, they have not been forthcoming about this and saying secure vault on your phone, and oh, by the way, third parties too. That hasn't come up at all. Yeah. So that seems a little sketchy to me. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was just curious if anybody was familiar with any judicial decisions involving use of facial recognition in the context of fingering or pinpointing a particular criminal defendant. I'm not aware of any. It seems as though that issue is bound to come up at some point. And at that point, this Georgetown study or one of these other studies that shows the error rate associated with facial recognition seems like that could come into play to challenge this technology as a valid basis for using in a criminal defendant's trial.
Yeah, I can't think of a specific instance where that's happened. I know that we've seen at least reports that local highway police have been taking photographs or using applications that do some sort of biometric lookup. So I don't know particularly, but certainly it's going to be an issue if it isn't already.
Right.
Absolutely.
One of the things this Daily Mail piece does is talk about the fact that privacy advocates like Privacy International and others are trying to stave off the time when a law enforcement officer wandering the streets can have, some sort of Google Glass overview or some sort of way of scanning the faces of people around them and knowing information about them just moving through crowds from face recognition databases. But I think that staving that off is about the best we can do. I think we are definitely headed toward it. Don't you, Scarlet?
Yeah, so one of the things that the Georgetown report found so troubling was just the lack of regulation around the use of the technology. And I also thought, I think they draw a kind of interesting distinction in the ways in which you might use this technology in permissible and impermissible ways. But because of the lack of regulation, those lines haven't been drawn clearly enough for example, law enforcement agencies. So one permissible ways would include kind of targeted uses of facial recognition technology. So as a way of verifying, for example, the identity of a specific person. But ways in which we might consider impermissible, for example, would be if you have facial recognition software running over kind of a real-time surveillance camera. So it's basically scanning the faces of everybody walking in front of that camera.
Which is, by the way, we've seen that in China, right? I think China's aptly named, terrifyingly named Skynet system of CCTV cameras. They've just rolled out, or they are in the process of rolling out AI tools to improve the act of real-time live facial recognition through their CCTV cameras. I mean, that's as Big Brother as it gets, and it's real life right now today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's not that hard to imagine similar uses of that technology if it continues unregulated in for example, in the U.S. context as well.
Scarlet, I actually just had a quick thought. I know that the UK is notorious as the hub of CCTV cameras. Is China surpassing the UK as far as like density of cameras, or is the UK, do you know, still like the most densely surveilled city in the world?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I mean, there's this popular idea. I mean, I think that London, for example, is one of the most like densely networked CCTV camera city in the world, but I don't know right now, for example, if there are Chinese cities like Beijing or Shanghai that have surpassed London in their sort of blanketing.